Hello everyone, welcome to another Grimgar video. Today I want to talk to you guys about Volume 18. If you want, take this video as my official review for Volume 18 because holy shit, this volume was amazing. Before I get into the spoiler section of this video, I do think that Volume 18 is hands down the best mix of character writing, action, comedy that I've seen in Grimgar. And if I have to say any negatives about the volume, is maybe one section that I feel like dragged on for a little too long, and I'll get to that when I get to it. And before I begin, let's do all that generic YouTube stuff, and please hit the like button, share, subscribe, all that stuff, and let's begin. Quite frankly, I think Volume 18 is probably the best Grimgar has been, like, ever. There is character arc resolutions. There's characters finally coming together in relationships. There's theories I've had about what's going on with Mary for a long time that finally get answered. Not completely, but to a very almost complete level. We get a bunch of world building with all the dwarves. We get peak Ranta, which is something I never thought I had to say in my life. And quite a few fights. So I'm not going to go into too much detail of every single section of the book because I'm going to be here all day if I do. But I'm glad they brought back Yume's father character, Itsukushima. I love him being in this book because he's a very sometimes serious character. He's also kind of like awkward. He's got this fun chemistry with Yume because he really treats her like his daughter. And you also get a lot of characterization from him, funny enough. And I am fully expecting him to die because every time they introduce like characters that have like no negative qualities to their character at all, they usually die. For example, there's a character later on I'm going to talk about who likes horses, and even Haru starts to like him, and he's very like kind and sweet, but a little weird, and he just gets eaten. It's fucking terrible. Yume's teacher honestly gets like immediately imprisoned by the douchebag general man, Jin Marcus. Fuck that guy. He's such a... Unfortunately, Yume's teacher's not really good at communicating with humans, so he lets it slip that the dwarves have a special weapon, which later turns out to be rifles, which was actually earlier set up back in like I think volume 10 or 11 or something when they were stuck on an island. And Yume's other teacher who knew martial arts, that lady who was really kind of annoying, she had a rifle and that she used to scare the shit out of Haru. Well, it turns out the dwarves have a bunch of rifles. I really enjoyed the dwarves like lore being expanded upon in this book. The fact that dwarves have a shit ton of food and alcohol in reserves here in war times. Currently, they're being attacked by a bunch of orcs and their factions, along with the foregun, which is a giant pain in the ass where you're getting attacked by that many different factions at once. And later it turns out they're also getting attacked by half dwarves. Like I said, there's a lot of lore that they expand upon in this book with dwarves. Dwarves are kind of fucked up. They have like half dwarves that are slaves, and later it turns out that the half dwarves are also betraying them because obviously they're fucking being enslaved. So they gave the orcs guns that the dwarves had, so now they're armed with orcs, half dwarves, guns, and all of Forgun's army, which is crazy dangerous. So Jin Marcus is like, okay, well, we'll send Haru and his friends to try getting information from Yume's teacher to try going to go help the dwarves. He's essentially just sending them out, talk to the dwarves, and try to get them to actually agree to give them guns too. Like I said, Jin Marcus is a cunt. And the thing is, okay, when it comes to the fact that Jin Marcus wanted to send a group of people to go have the dwarves agree to give them guns before they get back up to them is ultimately what gets the dwarves all killed. Because the guy was so focused on trying to get his own share of weaponry that he didn't think that maybe there wasn't enough time to do that. He should have just sent armies up there and helped them and then discussed how they could have like negotiated some weapons for them. What makes it worse, the orcs are essentially moving from the dwarf stronghold probably down back to Alterna. So it's ultimately gonna blow up in Jin Marcus's face when the orcs all want to take over the city. Especially since they did it the first time with goblins and with Forgun. So it's gonna get worse and worse if he doesn't help the dwarves now. Also, it's kind of been lightly implied that Jin Marcus isn't as smart as people actually think he is, and this is kind of alluding to that as well, because Haru even straight up says maybe he's been overrating Jin Marcus's intelligence for a little while now, because he started noticing small things himself. Moving on, I do think that it's awesome that Haru finally got his memory back. I've known a lot of people from the community being very frustrated about the fact that they've had their memories erased for a while, especially Haru's memory. And I noticed the setup previously. I've talked about this over on TikTok and in past videos that it's already been set up a couple times for Haru and the rest of the teammates to get their memories back. At this point, it was only Haru who got his memories back, but realistically, that's all that really matters, if I'm being honest. Like Kuzaku and Satoru getting their memories back wouldn't really change all that much. I do wish they got their memories back. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter all that much. As long as Haru gets his memory back, that's all that really kind of matters for the story, if I'm being honest. Kuzaku even like makes a comment about that. He's happy that Haru get his memory back, and he doesn't really care if he gets his memory back, because it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, if I'm being honest, as fucked up as it sounds. But while Haru was getting his memories back, we finally got more insight onto Mary and her situation, because she started acting weird and moving up towards the mysterious tower. Whatever's inside of her at this point is essentially more interested in figuring things out in that tower. At least that's what it seems like. It really seems to really be focused on that tower, which is interesting because that's ultimately where Eren, Leslie, and Chihiro actually are. So that makes me curious to see if eventually the thing that's inside of her, which later on turns out to be the No Life King, which I called it a long time ago because it's kind of obvious. Whatever is in the tower is what is making the No Life King curious about what is in there. It's like attracting them. Moving on to the trip to the Dwarf Stronghold. I actually like the majority of this trip. We got a bunch of character moments. Haru and Mary finally get together with their whole little moment, and they also get more insight on what's going on inside of her, even more than we did before. She talked about all the different souls in her body, the names of all the souls in her body. The one thing that made me kind of raise my eyebrow was the fact that the orc that was in her doesn't come out much, which is interesting. That might come back later. And the fact that one of them was a rat, and before that, I think that's where the No Life King, for the No Life King was supposedly killed. That's where all those memories are. And I don't think the No Life King creature inside of Mary wants her to see that, which is interesting. Maybe it's that she can't see it until she accepts him, which he made a comment about that while he was talking to Haru and everybody else before. And I'm interested in seeing what that means, because by the end of the book, she does accept him. Does that mean that he's always going to be in control of her? Which I hope not. It's bad. But then Haru and her have a little moment, and they finally embrace and they finally kiss, which took in like, what, in universe, like 5-6 years? I think it's about 5 years, actually. I might be exaggerating. Yeah, no, it might be actually 5 or 6 years. Holy shit, yeah. I really love how, like, Ranta reacts to realizing that Haru and her actually, like, embrace, kiss, and the whole lovey-dovey stuff. He keeps, like, pestering Haru for, like, the next couple of, like, chapters about it. He keeps asking questions, mostly because he's curious about how he would go about it with Yume. Speaking of that, we do get small bits of, like, Yume and him trying to develop a relationship, or at least him trying to develop a relationship with Yume. I like how Yume's teacher overhears Ranta talking to Haru about Yume, and the guy's like, oh god, why does it have to be Ranta? Why does he have to love my daughter? It's so bad. Like, I felt so bad for both of them. It was really funny though. And the section while they're traveling to the Dwarf Kingdom is, well, very good, entertaining, because there's a lot of comedy, there's a lot of like fun moments with the characters, a lot of character development, and a lot of character moments. It also has one section, this is the part that I talked about earlier in the beginning, where it kind of gets a little annoying. It's only one section though. It's the section when they get attacked by giants. Haru is stuck on a giant foot for a while, and this just dragged on for way too long. And I've noticed it's kind of a trend in some of the books where Haru's self-deprecating, like, mindset just drags for a very long time to an absurd degree sometimes. And this is one of those sections where he was stuck on the foot and it just lasted too long. And I went back and reread a lot of the sections before I'm making this video, and I still feel like it just lasts too long. Unless this is, like, some setup for future fights where Haru tries to, like, use a giant or something, or I don't know. I will say there are times while I'm reading this book and, like, other volumes that I feel like Grimgar would really benefit from being a full-fledged book, not just a light novel. Because introducing one of the chapters while they're traveling to the Dwarf Stronghold, that there are lizard people, and they're not as intelligent as people, but they're still very dangerous. And they just have an off-screen fight with lizard people. Ranta and Haru are being chased down by them, and they just off-screen them. That's it. It was really weird. And the book is kind of just like, yeah, there's lizard people. Anyway, moving on. It's like, what the fuck, man? I want to know more about lizard people. But other than that, the rest of the book is fantastic. And when we do get to the Dwarven Stronghold, we get a bunch of lore expansion on the slaves they have, the way they live, and a bunch of other stuff. And I didn't mention this before, but they do talk about how, like, what happens when dwarves don't have alcohol in war times. They start fighting each other, and there's a lot of infighting, which I think is fucking hilarious. Dwarves in Grimgar universe, if they're not drinking, they're fighting each other because of the low alcohol numbers, and they're actually willing to fight each other, which is just ridiculous, but also fucking hilarious. That the Dwarven has so much technology and are so intelligent, but yet they're so stupid that they're willing to kill each other for alcohol while they're in the middle of a war. They're also somehow surprised that their slaves are trying to go against them and help the enemy. Gee, I can't figure out why the they would do that. I do like how this book actually makes the fact that the main characters have to help the dwarves very morally ambiguous. Even Ranta at one point has a moment where he's freaking out about the fact that they have slaves and they treat them so poorly. And he just hates the idea that he has to help these slave owners, essentially, which is, it's true, it's fucked up. But for them to get what they want, they do have to, unfortunately, help people that have slaves. And it's a very big moral situation with them, but they have to help them to get what they want. And it's unfortunate. And it makes, at least me, the reader, not really care whether or not the dwarves essentially live, but more that I care about the fact that I want the main characters to live, but I don't give two fucks about the dwarves. I didn't give a fuck what happens to them because they're just, most of them seem to be kind of shitty. But at the same time, there are some dwarves that seem to understand that slavery was bad, because the dwarf that they were talking to, who was a blacksmith, I believe, he kind of seemed to understand why Ranta was mad, and he didn't fight Ranta on the whole subject. He's just like, yeah, that is shitty. That is us. Sorry, man. And there seems to be some morally gray with the dwarves. They're not all on the same side when it comes to that belief, which is interesting. Eventually, Forgan does attack the city, and this is where the story gets really fucking crazy. Haru has to lead away an entire group of undead orcs and monsters, and one of the monsters chasing them is the four-armed undead that was fighting the main characters in volume 8. This was the same four-armed undead that caused the Typhoon Rocks to have trouble with him. And he was chasing Haru the entire time, and Haru got super exhausted. Ranta came in and beat the four-armed monster undead by himself, dude. It was such a good Ranta moment. I was so proud of him. I was losing my mind, man. It was so good. In the last couple volumes, we've actually seen Ranta and how he has progressed emotionally as a character, and now this moment shows us how much he's progressed physically, how strong he's actually gotten, which is insane. He uses tactics, he uses strategy. He actually uses his speed quite a lot to keep the monster off balance. This is probably Ranta's best fight throughout the light novel. It's quick, but it's so satisfying seeing him actually be able to beat this guy. There's also that added layer of sadness to this too. This four-armed undead, I keep forgetting his name, but I'll put it up on the screen if I can find it. Him and Ranta had a bit of a kind of drinking buddy friendship back when he was in Forgun, and Ranta knows this guy's not all evil. He just has, like, to do his job, and Ranta has to kill him. He decapitates him, and he has a moment where he's standing in front of the head of the monster. He says goodbye, and he stabs down with his katana and kills him. And I felt some little bits of emotion there. Eventually, they do have to abandon the city because of all of this chaos going on in the city. There's so many dead dwarves everywhere. Everything's on fucking fire. And while they're leaving the city, Haru and everyone else does eventually get cornered by Forgun, which everything at that point goes completely to shit. Haru and Ranta get pinned down by Takagashi. And Jumbo just starts killing people. Like, they have the Dwarf King lady with him, and he just kills them. He just kills every single dwarf and the king of the dwarves right then and there. And this is where it all gets really depressing. My favorite character, Kuzuku, ends up dying because he charges Jumbo. And Jumbo doesn't really care. He just slashes him in half, which causes Satora to actually lose it herself, which I kind of figured Satora did have a thing for Kuzuku, but I wasn't 100% sure because she was so subtle about it. But I guess this kind of answers the question that, yeah, she had a thing for Kizuku because she completely lost her mind when he died. And then she gets killed. And then this forces Mary to actually fully accept the no-life king into her body, and he kind of brings them back. Kind of not really. I don't know what the fuck they even call what they are now. I think they're undead now, but they seem very fucked up and off. To be fair, the No Life King did say it would take a little bit for them to adjust to it, but I don't know what that means. And then the world just kind of starts to collapse. Everything goes black, and then that's the end of the book. Now, I skipped a lot of context because I don't want to spoil everything, and I don't have time to talk about everything in the book. But this light novel was so good, was just so good. The entire time I was cheering, I was laughing. The book made me cry. I had a small breakdown at the end of the book. It was just really good. So if you guys want my recommendation, please go and read the book. It's really good. But anyway, if you enjoyed this video of me talking about Grimgar Volume 18, please let me know in the comments down below. And I actually do plan on eventually going back and reviewing every single volume from the beginning after the story actually ends. And hopefully you guys enjoy that too. And I'll see you guys next video. Bye.